Now that we have addressed what effective rubrics look like, let's talk more specifically about how to create effective rubrics. Let's start with describing proficiency. So the first step in the process is to really identify what is proficient. This is the guaranteed and viable part of the learning. Proficient marks a target that we have for every student. Instruction is then largely centered around moving students toward this proficient target. Our next step is to go to the minimum success criteria. If we were to describe learning in relation to descriptors of advanced, proficient, near proficient, beginning level, and no evidence, the information described in this slide would be in reference to beginning level. When a student fails to provide evidence at all, they then fall into the lowest assessment category, no evidence. So essentially, when we ask what is the bare minimum for actual success, we would be looking at many rubrics that we've experienced through our education started at the minimum level of proficiency, often corresponding with a letter grade of a D. And it noted absolute non-success, or in some cases, no evidence. So for example, a student does not use MLA format, or a student does not know the difference between acute and obtuse angles. Oftentimes, these descriptors would fall under the minimal success criteria. Instead, we should consider our beginning level of proficiency to be what is the bare minimum of skill the student needs in order to be able to continue their studies, not no evidence. Anything below the first level is failure to show evidence. Students, if time allows, should be given the opportunity to try again or to continue with this learning. Once you have identified the proficient target as well as the minimum for learning, we can then think about what advanced learning looks like. So be sure that first, advanced work is attainable. Oftentimes, teachers make the advanced level success criteria very difficult and nearly unattainable. So make sure you give clear expectations for what that advanced actually means and give opportunities for advancement. Avoid phrases like goes above and beyond or does an excellent job. Again, these types of phrases are really difficult to assess and completely subjective. Rather, consider using the highest levels of blooms, such as creates, synthesizes, proposes, reimagines. So, if we were to use this example, notice how each level of criteria requires a student to be more complex in their thinking. Beginning with proficient, students need to explain a complex problem. To be at the beginning level, they must be able to minimally identify the problem. For a student developing to proficiency or near proficient, a student needs to explain an overall problem, but in a much less complex manner than what is required at the proficient level. Finally, our advanced criteria requires students to demonstrate evidence of using the learned scientific knowledge to be problem solvers. Note the Bloom's taxonomy verbs that are used: applies, explains, and identifies. To further illustrate the previous example, here is a summary of evidence that students might provide to show the varying levels of learning. Note the complexity of the student's learning grows in each example. It is not just doing more or giving multiple examples that means a higher level of proficiency. Instead, students in their evidence have shown a complexity of thought that is growing from each level of success criteria. In the next section, we will briefly highlight how rubrics and clear success criteria impacts assessment design and instruction.